Hey, it's Drybear. Another week has come and went, so it's time to check in on the tank rankings overall for all tank specializations in Dragonflight across all PvE content. As always, if you have any questions or comments for me, you'll find me live every day on twitch.tv/Drybear. Come by and say hi. Now we'll begin like we always do by checking in on the performances for last week, week 6. Now, some of the tanks here got some changes. Guardian Druid got a bunch of changes and some base reworks to their talent tree. Brewmaster also got some nice changes. And then Protection Warrior had some changes as well. But this is kind of where we've been since the start of Season 1. Guardian Druid struggling in the last bit. Prot Paladin, Vengeance, Demon Hunter, and Brewmaster struggling for the middle spots. And then Blood DK and Prot Warrior outperforming everyone in a very significant way. So let's take a look at week 7 to see what changed in 10.0.5. And here we go, week 7. This is a much better, much friendlier trend line. Prot Warrior and Blood DK are still performing at the highest level, so you still have that there, but it's much smoother. There's no like major jagged drop-offs between them. It's much more impressive. Now, one thing that we've been noticing is we have been seeing Protection Paladin climb up slowly. Brewmaster got a nice bump. They're actually performing much better than before. Guardian Druid still struggling, although Guardian Druid doing better in Mythic Raid. So let's go through each of the tanks in week 7 and talk about where they are and what happened. At the top, you see Protection Warrior, still the best tank in the game. They did see some minor adjustments, but nothing too major. And I think that their kit is great. Their defenses are great. Their ability to deal damage and take damage is great. Now, keep in mind, ranking tanks is hard. Ranking tanks and healers is a little bit less direct than DPS. The numbers you see are from the parses this week in all 3 categories for tanks based on completion. It's not DPS. It's not healing. If you put DPS, some tanks will be higher than others, even though that's not really, you want tanks for DPS, especially in Mythic Plus, but the primary need for a tank is to stay alive, and that's a little bit harder to rank. And same thing goes for healing. If this was a meter based on healing, Blood DK would put everyone to shame because they have insane healing, but it doesn't represent their ability to be the best tank. So this is just speed, completion, performance in all categories for the tanks at the highest level, showing which tanks are outperforming others. And I think for the first time this season, the line is actually pretty good. This is the kind of trend line, if you look at the very edge, that I would expect to see across all classes all the time. You don't want these really steep deviations where someone is significantly lower. Obviously, they're going to wax and wane, especially in Mythic Plus when the actual affixes change every week. Some tanks may rise, some tanks may fall. But in general, I think this trend line is much better than it's been since the start of Season 1. Protection Warrior is the best in Heroic Raid and Mythic Plus, and shockingly, Mythic Raid Blood DK overtakes Protection Warrior, but Prot Warrior is in that second place slot, not too far behind. In the second place overall is Blood DK. They are second in Heroic. They are first in Mythic Raid, but surprisingly, they are 4th this week in Mythic Plus. They're actually getting outperformed by Protection Paladin, Brewmaster, and Prot Warrior. Now, we know that there were some nice buffs there. I actually really like the changes that Brewmaster got to the tree, as well as the cooldown reduction on their shield, their bubble, which is really nice. So overall, some good things coming in for them. But Blood DK still, because of their raid performance, ended up doing insanely well this week. Brewmaster in the 3rd slot. Like I said, Protection Warrior, Protection Paladin, Vengeance, Demon Hunter, and Brewmaster have been fighting for that 3rd place. And I would say that Brewmaster hasn't been taking it historically. It's been Vengeance most of the time. Protection Paladin has taken it a few times, and Brewmaster's kind of been in the middle. But this week, they did great. They're doing 3rd overall in Heroic Raid, 2nd overall in Mythic Plus. They still have great damage, although their damage was redistributed away from Resonant Fist, which is a passive effect, to their active abilities. But they did awesome. 2nd best in Mythic Plus. So they're doing really well. They just did towards the bottom in Mythic Raid, though, it's still within a reasonable check. We're probably at a point now where every tank is in a great spot, and maybe Guardian Druid just needs a little bit more love. But this is a good setup for everybody here. After Brewmaster is Vengeance overall. They did get a minor tankiness update like 2 balance tunings ago, where they just got a little bit more armor in general, but they really haven't had any major changes, and they've been kind of doing about average relative to other tanks, but still doing well. I mean, you can bring them into any style of content, and they will be comparable. Underneath Vengeance DH is Protection Paladin. They've been doing much better in Mythic Plus, and they've actually been holding third for the last like 3 weeks for Mythic Plus. They bring a lot of utility. They are super tanky if they're not asked to do other things. I think they're less tanky in Raid because everything's constant, but you can rotate your cooldowns, all your cooldowns on Protection Paladin, you know, Sentinel, Eye of Tyr, your Ardent Defender, Guardian Ancient Kings, your Bubble. You can rotate those pretty effectively to have tons and tons of tankiness. It's also probably easier to maintain your passive armor bonus from Shield of the Righteous in Mythic Plus than it is in Raid, when you have to do other things like kite Broodkeeper around and, you know, do other mechanics and taunt swap, and you're not taking damage all the time, that sort of thing. But yeah, they're definitely doing fine in Mythic Plus. They are doing the worst in Mythic Raid, less than everyone else by a noticeable margin, and they're doing about average in Heroic Raid. Underneath Protection Paladin, at the very last spot is Guardian Druid, primarily because of their Mythic Plus score and their Heroic Raid score. So in variable group sizes where you need the tank to kind of live on their own, Heroic Raid, they do the worst out of all the tanks this week. Mythic Plus, they do noticeably worse than every tank in the game. Actually quite significantly, and that's kind of the big reason why they're in the last slot now, is because their Mythic Plus performance is so noticeably worse than the other tanks. And in Mythic Raid, they're number 3 this week. So just doing great. They have some new Raze builds, some new TNC builds. They have, you know, some new Arcane builds. They have this Regrowth build, which is pretty fun to play with. I was messing around with that this week, but in general, I think if you're taking them to Mythic Raid and it's a Guardian Druid that knows how to play all the way through, they know how to play, and they have good support behind them, they can do great. When they're you know, they have to kind of be on their own in like a pug setting or with not much support, they perform the worst right now out of all the tanks. So that's where we land with the tanks this week. Let me know down below what you think about all this. If these numbers surprised you, or maybe they didn't. And if you still have an opinion that tanks need changing, what changes would you be making the tanks going into future updates to help get them into line of what you see as the future for tanks? As always, if you have any questions or comments for me, you'll find me live every day on twitch.tv/Drybear. Come by and say hi. If you enjoyed yourself today, leave a like down below. You can support me and my work on Patreon and view Patreon exclusive content, link in the description. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one.